Stop falling in love with bits and pieces of a person and look at the big picture. Cut it at the knees, ma'am or sir. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Roz, and in this video we're going to talk about how to learn how to trust yourself again, especially after bad relationship choices. Here we go. I cried a lot after therapy today, which is not utterly surprising. Every time I tell the history of it, I tend to get really sad, and it impacts my entire day. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay in bed today because school begins tomorrow and I had to prepare for class. Today, during the session, realization really set in how much of my ex's words still had an effect on me. I was in a really dark place, and some things he said to me in the past still lives rent-free in my head. That is so true, that many of us have people who are still living rent-free in our head today because of the things that they shared with us that have been embedded in our memory. I guess because he changed how I viewed myself. My self-esteem has never really been high, and being with him knocked down the little levels it was on. I'm still trying to learn how to trust myself. Your brain does a really good job of trying to protect you from making the same mistakes over and over again. And maybe you're thinking, well, if that's the case, why do I keep making the same mistakes over again?
Slow down.
Just slow down for a second. We're going to talk about why that is. Well, this is a good thing that's happening to you. The problem is that your brain is not as smart as we may think it to be. Your brain is nothing more than a tape recorder that sees things, hears things, and then it stores things for you to use at a later date. Or if you say, okay, this isn't important, then you just kind of discard that. I know at some point you or someone you know has touched a hot stove, and the brain does a really good job of telling you that not only is it touching the hot stove, but it's you being around a hot stove. It's you looking at a hot stove, you cooking on a hot stove that has caused so much pain, because it takes all that information and it stores it as a memory. Unfortunately, sometimes these memories are very fragmented. So you may experience yourself walking towards the stove, and then your brain says, if you walk towards that stove, you're going to get burned. You remember yourself screaming at the contact of a hot stove, and your brain says, you remember that time you were screaming when that hot stove burned you? You remember how that scream sound. Don't go near there. You may even be left with a scar, and it's a reminder to you that stoves are bad. What your brain doesn't tell you is that you can go back, you can cook a wonderful meal using mittens, being careful, watching where you put your hands, and you'll never get burned. But your brain doesn't process that. When you've experienced a negative relationship, your brain is going to tell you, stay away from that person, stay away from people who look like people like that, stay away from people who smell like people like that, stay away from people who have the same car like people like that, and then you can protect yourself.
I would just say to you, whoop, there it is.
It does not have the capacity to be able to process things mentally like you can. But what happens then is your memories come in very fragmented. So then it also changes what you believe about yourself. In other words, if you touch the hot stove, you may begin to think, dang it, I'm such a klutz. I'm so clumsy. I can't even cook without burning myself. In the case of a relationship, dang, I keep running into people who take advantage of me. I don't have the ability to be able to successfully choose partners. Because your, sense of self-worth is so low, you may think that's all that you can access is people who are gonna do you like that. We begin to feel shame, regret, remorse, a lot of negative feelings that are attached to those negative thoughts. There is so much remorse and regret that you're consumed in what did I do wrong? Really become very critical of yourself. Not being able to see that some of this had to do with the person who took advantage of you. Some of this had to do with choosing someone who was already dysfunctional, or choosing someone who was already abusive.
This is my girl right here.
And so while you want to accept responsibility for your role in what happened, please do keep in mind to tell yourself the entire story. These negative stories that I'm embedding into my memory are actually becoming true over and over again, because that's what your brain is now looking for. If you went outside today and you say, I love yellow cars, you're going to begin to see more yellow cars, because your brain is going to say, it's like it's on the radar of the brain and it's going to begin to spot yellow cars. And you'll say, oh my goodness, every time I see yellow cars all the time. And so you're going to continue to reinforce the seeing of that, just like you would say, every time I always run into people who are always taking advantage of me. You're going to reinforce that. And no matter what you do, you won't be able to stop attracting people who take advantage of you, people who are dysfunctional, people who are abusive, until you begin to change the narrative that you're telling yourself. So we've identified that there's this 1 or 2 or 3 things that I keep telling myself based on my previous experiences that I need to process. So how do we process them? Second thing you need to do is challenge. My question to you is this story that you're telling yourself completely true? Part of it is. You made a bad decision. Yes, accept responsibility. But is it totally true that it was all you? And if it is, then that gives you more data to be able to make necessary changes. But if it's not, really look at the reality for what it is. You may be thinking, well, I'm just trying to keep it real. It's okay to keep it real, but how is that serving you? The negative things that you're telling yourself, do they make you feel defeated, less than, incapable, like you're not worthy to be loved, awful about yourself, stuck in the past? If they do, it's time to challenge that thought. It's never going to help you get to the place that you want to be in your life or in relationships. So this is the reason why challenging is such an important piece of this story. Were you young at the time when you should have been naive and vulnerable? Was the person bigger than you and overpowering, and that's why they were able to take advantage of you? What could you have really done in that situation, in that moment, that was in your control at the time? Step 3 is to really flip it. Replace those thoughts with something that's more positive and more realistic. And if you want to prevent this from happening again, you're going to have to press rewind. So when I was in the band, I played the trombone. My band director would make us watch the videotape of our halftime performance. And while we were celebrating, he told us, watch yourself. As I began to watch that Monday replay of the tape, I could see that there were moments that I was not in alignment. Our formations that we were trying to create were a little sloppy. That allowed for course correction. So by the time we were in competition season, aka your next relationship, you should be able to see all of the things that contributed to you not being successful so that you can course correct that. Are you looking at yourself just to beat yourself up, or are you looking at yourself so that you can make the necessary changes? If you once dated someone who was dysfunctional, do you see them appearing in the next relationship that you're in? Does he or she sound or say similar things as someone else that you dated in the past? Stop making people so human and falling in love with bits and pieces of a person. If you just looked at them on paper, do they fit the description of the person who you were in your last relationship that ended on a horrible note? If they are, cut it at the knees, ma'am or sir. If someone is constantly criticizing you and it reminds you of a time where you've been criticized in the past, the brain is trying to tell you, be careful. Self-esteem is going to be so low like it was in the previous relationship. Do you want to go down this road? Do you want to continue down this road? So it's going to remind you. And rather than you saying, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because they're a different person, don't humanize them in that moment. Think about the experiences that you have had. Replay that tape over again so that you can make course correction. If you want to watch more, of course, you can click here to watch my latest video. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.